Hello everyone. In this lesson we're going to answer the question, what in the world is middleware? And actually, before we try to understand what middleware is, let's first see an example of a problem that middleware could solve. So a real world example, let's say you're logged in and you try to visit the Create Post screen. So yes, it makes sense for a logged in user to see this screen, but if I copy this URL, and this is a totally different browser, this is Firefox, I'm not logged in, I should not be able to visit this URL because I'm not logged in. And I definitely should not be able to submit or post the form request. So before we even get into the concept of what is middleware, we already have the tools to perform this check, right? We would just want to redirect a non-logged in user who visits this URL back to the homepage URL where they can register for an account or log in. So really quick, before we even get into middleware, just for a frame of reference, let me show you what I'm talking about, how we could solve this problem ourselves. So we could just go into our post controller file, and down towards the bottom we have our show create form function. So what you could do is just say if, parentheses, curly brackets, and just say if, call the global auth function, look inside it for check, and if that is not true, so exclamation. So if the user is not logged in, then what do we want to do? We would just return a redirect back to the home page, semicolon. If you wanted to, you could set a flash message by calling with, but just for a quick and dirty example, let's just return a redirect. You could save that. So the logged in user in this browser window, I can still refresh and visit this URL, but in Firefox, I am not logged in, and if I try to visit this URL, cool, it sends me back to the home page. And then if you wanted to, you could use that same strategy for when the form actually gets submitted, right? The post request. However, even though writing code like this would work in this situation, there's a better tool for the job. Because what if we don't want to have to spell out code like this if check, across, 5 different routes or 10 different routes in our controller? That would be really repetitive. We want something more reusable. Also, what if we never even wanted this overall controller function to even be executed in the first place at all? What if we want to sort of intercept the HTTP request and not even let this function fire, right? If you're not logged in, there's no point in even executing the function. Also, wouldn't it be nice if we could set up some of these checks from within the convenience of our routes file, right? Instead of having to dig into all of our specific controller functions. Well, that is exactly what middleware does. So check this out. Do this with me. Let's remove those 3 lines of code that we just wrote, right? So show create form should just have this one line. So we're putting it back to the way it was. So now a visitor, a guest, who is not logged in can indeed visit create post once again. So now let's solve that same problem, but let's use middleware. To do this, we just jump into our routes file. So controller command P, search for web.php in the routes folder. And check this out. So here is the GET request for /create post. All we do is go on to the very end of the line before the semicolon, and we're just going to call a function of middleware. Now, in the parentheses, there are different options we can give it, or different names, I should say. So quotes, and let's use the middleware that is named auth. Let's go ahead and save this. And now if you try to visit this URL where you are logged in, still works. If I go to Firefox, just be warned, we are going to need to make one more adjustment before this works. So if I refresh on create post, we see good news and bad news. So the good news is that Laravel said, hey, you can only visit this URL if you're logged in. The bad news is that Laravel is trying to redirect us to a screen where we could log in. And that's not actually bad news. It's just bad news because you and I have not named one of our routes as login yet. So all we need to do to fix this would be in our routes file. Let's just say that our homepage route, right, just the base URL route, let's label that as our login route. So that way, if Laravel ever needs to tell someone, hey, you need to log in, that's where it would send them. So to name a route, at the end of it, you just say --, and call the name method. And let's just give it a name, so quotes of login. So if you save, now if I refresh and try to visit create post where I'm not logged in, awesome. It sends me back to the home page. Now let's talk about what middleware actually is, because we just saw it in action, but how does it actually work? It's a little bit confusing because middleware is living at the very end of this line of code, But conceptually, I want you to imagine that this is happening before this function gets called. So just because of the PHP syntax, yes, it sits at the end of the line, but the idea is that this is going to run, it's going to get in the middle of the HTTP request, and it's a chance to intercept or end or modify the HTTP request. The Laravel documentation encourages us to think of middleware as different layers that a request passes through. So in other words, when someone sends a request to this route, before it ever even gets to the method that we're calling on our controller, it must first pass through the middleware. The middleware can add on new data to the request, it can redirect you. So this is really convenient, right? We don't need to modify our controller functions. Our function will never even get called. It's just a really efficient and organized way of handling situations like this. Now, to be clear, Laravel has many other middleware functions than just auth. So that's just one example. So we don't actually want to do this, but just for an example, what if we only wanted guests or people who are not logged in to be able to visit this function or this URL? Instead of auth, we could change this to guest. Laravel has a built-in middleware called guest. So you can save that, and now in Firefox, if I try to visit, create post, I'm allowed to, but the screen where I am logged in, if I refresh, well, you can see 404 not found because the guest middleware by default is going to try to redirect you to /home. Really quick, I can show you how we can adjust what a built-in middleware does. So just go into your app folder, your HTTP folder, and then middleware. And these are the built-in sort of default middlewares that Laravel ships with. And in particular, since we're using the guest middleware, jump into this redirect if authenticated file. So this is what's going to get called when you use the guest middleware. And around line 26, instead of redirecting to the home route, you could just change this, and redirect to quotes / and you could even give it a flash message. So at the end, you could say with, and let's give it the first argument of failure and then comma, second argument, only guests can do that, or some sort of message. But if you save that, and now if I refresh, if I go back to the URL I'm not supposed to be able to go to, create post, awesome, it kicks me back to the home page, and there's the flash message. Now, we didn't actually want to set that so only guests can view it. So just back in your routes file, let's change this from guest and just put it right back to auth. Let's do the same thing for the route where you actually send a post request to submit the form. So on this route, let's also at the end call middleware, and the one that we're interested in is auth. And we could also protect these different routes as well, right? So for example, the register where you send a post request to register, that should only be allowed for guests, right? So at the end, you could just call, middleware guest. In terms of logging in, you should only be able to log in if you're a guest, right? If you're already logged in, you can't log in again. So middleware guest. And then for log out, you should only be able to log out if you're currently logged in. So that would be middleware auth. Cool, let's go ahead and save that. Now I will say this, if middleware still doesn't make perfect sense, that's okay. In my opinion, it didn't make complete sense to me until I actually created my own middleware. So this is where the video truly gets interesting and educational. Instead of just using the built-in middlewares that Laravel has to offer us, we can go and create our own. So for example, even though the auth middleware is doing basically exactly what we would want it to, let's imagine if we wanted to create our own middleware. Like imagine if we had to do something really custom or check for something custom in a route. Let me show you what you would do. Just open up your command line and you can say PHP artisan make : middleware, and then a space, and you just make up a name. Why don't we name it, must be logged in. Press enter. Whoops, you can see I actually ran into an error message, and that's because I have a typo in my routes file. So around line 21, you can see when I was calling this guest middleware, I forgot the E in the word middle. So if I save that and run the command again, so PHP artisan make middleware, and then the name must be logged in. Cool. So what that did is in our app HTTP middleware folder, Laravel created this brand new file for us called must be logged in PHP. There's nothing special about this name. I just made this name up. It could be anything. Let me show you why this is so cool. So Laravel has all of this boilerplate code for us, and we're just interested in this part down here. What I really want to draw your attention to here is next. So we're seeing $next. So remember when we said middleware is like these different layers of a route that a request passes through? And remember back in our routes file, we said that before our function on our controller ever runs, the request first needs to pass through the middleware. Well, next is how the request passes through to the next layer. So in other words, if we don't add any code here, this middleware wouldn't be doing anything. It's just an incoming request comes in and we immediately say, okay, you're good. You can move on to the next function in this request. This middleware has done its job. It's time to move on to the next function. But instead, what you're going to want to do is check something, make some sort of decision, look at some piece of data in the incoming request, do something, right? Some sort of filter or check, something interesting. In our case, here's what I would do. I would just wrap this within an if statement, so only if you're logged in. So I'd probably say if parentheses, curly brackets. For the check, it would just be, call the auth function, call the check function, move this return line, so where we're saying, okay, you can move on to the next part of the request, you're okay, you can pass through, move that into the if check. So then here, this would be if you're not logged in, and what I would do is just return a redirect to the home page, and I would even give it a flash message. So call with, and it would be failure, comma, and then you must be logged in. And that line with a semicolon. And now let's save this file. And now there's just one more step. So if we wanted to use this within our routes file, we do need to tell Laravel that, hey, our brand new middleware exists. To do that, we just dig into this file that's named kernel.php. And to be specific, it's the kernel.php file that lives within our HTTP folder. But if you open up that file, if you scroll down towards the bottom of this file, here's what we're looking for. So for me, it's around line 55. We're looking for protected route middleware. So this is where Laravel is spelling out all of its built-in middlewares, right? And these are available to call from the routes file. So what you and I want to do is just add on to this array and add our own brand new custom middleware. So maybe at the start of the array, I would just add a new line. So quotes, let's name it lowercase must, and then uppercase B logged in. And then associative array, so equals greater than. And then we just need to point towards the new class that we created for that new middleware. So to save typing, you could just use this same path that they're using for auth. So just copy that, paste it. So app, HTTP, middleware, and then just change the name of the class right here. So we named ours uppercase must be logged in. Go ahead and save that. Whoops, you need a comma at the end of that line, right? We're building an array. So save that. Cool, and now we can go use this within our routes file just like it's a built-in piece of middleware. Just like we used auth and guest. So check this out, back in web.php, for the create post screen, instead of using the middleware auth, let's use middleware of must be logged in. And I'll do the same thing for this route as well. And while we're at it, for this logout function, we're not going to test that, but I'll use this instead of auth as well. Now, there was nothing wrong with auth, but use your imagination. Imagine that we were doing something a bit more custom or bespoke in our middleware. But if we save that, so now if I try to visit create post, I'm logged in, so I absolutely can. In this tab, I'm not logged in. I try to visit it. Cool, it kicks me back to the home page. And there's our flash message, right? You must be logged in. And this is coming from our custom middleware. Big picture, the reason this is so cool is we now have this super recyclable or super reusable functionality, and we can apply them from within sort of this top level view of our routes file. Cool, so that was an introduction to middleware. Where do we go from here? Well, in our next lesson, we're going to begin creating the user profile screen, right? So if you click on, well, right now it's hard-coded to a little cat picture, but don't worry, eventually this will be your own avatar, but the idea is that when you click this, it should take you to your own profile, and you should see a list of all of the blog posts that you've created so far. So we're going to start setting up the profile screen. Let's keep our momentum rolling, and I will see you then.